So if this is your first time to join us for this series, I'm going to take about 2 minutes and catch you up, and then you're going to get to experience along with the rest of us what I think is going to be an incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful conversation. So this is not a political series. We don't have any political agendas here. I've tried to make that clear, but there are times when what's happening in culture, the issues of culture, and the principles of Jesus intersect. That happens quite often. And when it does, we feel like sometimes we need to speak into that, especially when it comes to the role and responsibility those of us who follow Jesus have to address some of the things going on. And so that's what we're doing throughout this series. And we started with something I think we can all agree on. That's a simple idea that what's best for people is what's best. That we don't always agree on what's best for people. You may think one path is best for people and I think another, or some plan, some procedure, some policy, some belief system, some behavior. Like we all disagree from time to time on what would be best for somebody, but I think we can all agree that we should be for what's best for people, and it's just figuring out what we think that is. So one of the things that I've suggested would be best for people in our current country and political climate and economic climate and just the cultural climate we have today, is if those of us, particularly who are followers of Jesus, would learn to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. This is what James, a brother of Jesus, said we should do. Unfortunately, we're doing the exact opposite. We are very slow to listen, we're very quick to speak, and we're very quick to become angry. And as a result, we find ourselves shouting at each other in our culture today instead of listening to and conversing with one another. And those pronouncements we make and those shouts that we make, they're not making any difference. We're just trying to make a point, and people who make a point never make a difference. People who make a point end up building barriers and burning down bridges. And as Christians, we're called to do the exact opposite. Jesus modeled for us something very different. Jesus showed up in a first century culture full of tension, political, racial, economic, gender tension. It was all there in the first century. And he broke down barriers, he built bridges, and as we saw last week, he modeled for us something so extraordinary, so powerful. Here's what he did. He would listen, befriend, care for, and defend. If you read the accounts of Jesus' life, you'll see him doing this over and over. He would listen. He would befriend people that no one else would befriend. He would cross aisles and, reach across and shake hands nobody else would shake. He would care for people in their experiences and their pain. And then he would defend people, not necessarily their position. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you should defend the positions of people that you disagree with. But he would defend the dignity, the value, and the self-worth of individuals, especially those people who disagreed with him on issues and those people that others tended to disrespect or mistreat in some way. And as Christians, I just feel like I don't know how we claim to follow Jesus if we don't follow that model and we don't do the same thing. So I told you last week, if you were here last week, you remember I told you today, what I want to do is just model, hopefully, what it looks like for us to have these kinds of conversations where we sit across the table from somebody, so to speak, where we begin to see things from their point of view, where we listen, and whether we agree with them or not, it doesn't matter. We're just going, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. Because here's what I know. The positions that you hold and the beliefs that you have, they make perfect sense to you, don't they? If they didn't, you wouldn't hold them. So I can look at you and say, well, that's just so wrong, and I don't understand why. Or I can sit and listen and try to understand your experiences and your life perspective and your point of view so I can see why you hold the views and the perspectives that you hold. We should never, ever, ever put a view above a you. We should never, ever, ever put a position above a person. If your view, if your position hurts other people, you've got the wrong view and position. Even if it's right, it's still wrong. So a couple years ago when some of the racial tension began to resurface very strongly in our country, I started having conversations with some friends, and over the last couple of years I've had a lot of conversations simply because I realized from my perspective and my upbringing, I saw this through, from one perspective, through one set of eyes, but I couldn't see it from the perspective of some of my friends. And these were some phenomenal conversations for me, and I thought, you know what? This is the perfect time for you to be able to hear a little bit of those conversations and to model what it looks like to sit down across from somebody who you may not agree with on everything, but to hear their point of view. And so in a few minutes, I'm going to bring 3 of my friends out, and we're going to have a very candid and a very raw conversation here in front of some of our closest friends. And I was asked earlier this morning, are these things scripted? No, they are not scripted. I sent them the questions. I said, don't give me your answers. I have no clue what's going to come out of their mouths, okay? This is going to be as raw and candid as if we were sitting at lunch talking about this. But here's what I want you to understand. This is the only context I want to give you, okay? My goal today, all of our goals today, it's not to promote any position. So you are going to hear some stuff today in all probability that you disagree with. Something at some point, one of us will say something that you disagree with, okay? That's okay. That's okay. Because if you hear that and you begin to think, oh, no, Matt, you need to speak up now and explain why that's wrong and why I'm right, hit pause, because we're not trying to promote a position. We're trying to model what it looks like to have some healthy conversation. So it's not about trying to convince who's right and who's wrong, okay? So if you walk out of here upset because I didn't, fight for your side, you missed the whole point of this, all right? This is all about learning how to have conversations and learn from one another. And these three friends of mine have just been phenomenal with me at doing what Jesus modeled, at listening, at befriending, at caring for, at helping me understand things and see things. So I think you're going to have an incredible, incredible next few minutes as you listen and you learn from them as well. I want to introduce to you Omar, Stacy, and William as they come up. Would you guys give them a big round of applause and welcome them to the stage? You can imagine how nerve-wracking it is for them to do this in front of a few hundred people. We did it first service, and they were like, oh, we got to do this again. Yeah, we got to do it again. So, hey, real quickly, I just want to introduce you to all three of them, and then we're going to jump right in. This is Omar Hernandez down here on the end.
Hello.
Omar and his wife Brittany are part of our church. They've been a part of our church for quite a while. They serve here. They do a lot here and invest a lot here. They have 4 incredible daughters that are all fairly young, so they've got their hands full. And Omar runs a painting company here in town. This is Stacy West. Stacy has been involved in our church for I don't know how long, but a long time, long time. And if you have a baby or a toddler, she has probably rocked them to sleep. She is the baby whisperer down there in Takeoff. She's been phenomenal for years. And when Jen and I were having our kids, we had one who had colic, and we had another one who was a significant stay in a NICU and then came home. And so that's a polite way of saying they weren't easy babies. That's what I'm saying. They tested us, and they would be so difficult. And Stacy, in the early years, babysat for us a whole lot when they were little, and she would come over, and the minute she held them, they'd stop crying, and we'd be like, they love her more than us. And I think it was true. I really do. She's phenomenal. And Stacy is a graduate of Murray State. She is the smartest person on this stage. She has a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees. She did it all by the time she was 27. Take that. Yeah, absolutely. Criminal justice. And Stacy now works in criminal justice and works for Cowee County Jail System and also in social work. Is that correct? And then William here. I've known William for a while. William is originally from Mayfield. And he and his wife Peggy have a beautiful girl, and then William's got 2 sons. It's how'd you put it in the first service? It's a hers, mine, and ours. Yeah, hers, mine, and ours deal. And William serves on our safety team, our security team. So if you have kids, you see him down there at the door, just being friendly. What he's really doing is making sure your kids stay safe through the whole service. He's incredible at that, and he's also, I don't know the exact title, but the fire marshal in Mayfield and over the ABC stuff. So William's got a lot on his plate as well. I've sat down, we've had conversations. I've had them with all 3 of you. Stacy, you and I probably been having these the longest. Stacy straightened me out on a bunch of stuff. She doesn't mind doing that. But I've had some incredible conversations with all 3 of you. So here's what I want to do. I just want us to jump right in the deep end right off the bat, okay? Talk to me about what you guys have experienced or maybe you still experience when it comes to either racism or prejudice or discrimination of some sort. And Stacy, we're going to start with you. You jump in first. Again, we're going to start with you.
So I haven't really intentionally or directly experienced racism, discrimination, but prejudice, yes. Most of my experience come from hanging around my white friends or babysitting for my white families. Like when I take my I call them my babies. When I take my babies out in public or to a social event, I get stares like, what is this person doing with these little white kids? So, I mean, most of it is stares and whispers. for the most part.
And go ahead. What do you do when they do that, Stacy?
Well, I make it my mission to make people feel uncomfortable. So what I do is I point to my skin and be like, yes, I'm black and it can't come off. So I don't know what you want me to do about that. But I mean, most of the time I probably give nonverbal nonverbal expressions too, because I get told I have really good facial expressions. So I probably just stare at them back.
You communicate it, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Omar, let's talk a little bit about you. What's some of the stuff you've run into?
Well,
years?
around my family, around my mom and dad, we speak the majority of the time. 90% of the time we speak Spanish, regardless of where we're at, whether we're eating out or at a store or at their house, we speak Spanish, and some people don't take too kind to that. You'll hear whispers or mumbles, and sometimes they'll even be a little bit more blunt about it. But if you're in this country, you should speak our language, which it's a choice not to. In our case, I mean, I can't speak for everybody,
But you do speak English, so you understand them when they're saying that,
clearly,
right? Yeah.
Clearly. My Espanol and my English is all right. So I mean, and it's just uncomfortable, to go through that.
Talk about.
especially
Go ahead.
especially if we're eating somewhere and grab lunch, and in the surrounding counties where we're not really visible all the time. Around here, I know a majority of you, and we'll go out and we'll eat and but if we're not really in the area very much, and we happen to drop in for lunch, and you hear other people just, say, not really degrading, but kind of hurtful things towards
And go ahead. And
us.
you're married to a Caucasian.
Yes, I'm married to a white lady.
So yeah. Thank you. So so Omar, tell them what you told me about what happens sometimes when you walk in restaurants as a family.
Well, I have 4 girls. They're kind of stair-stepped, and usually my wife will go in front of the pack, and then the girls will file in, and just to see people's facial expressions, it's smile, 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 and then they notice that I'm with them, and everything kind of changes.
Yeah. And you're not sure what
Yeah.
they mean by that, but you
Yeah,
notice.
But I can assume.
You can, yeah.
Yeah, I can assume.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen everywhere, and it doesn't happen all the time,
Sure.
but it happens enough for you to notice and kind of have I don't know if a complex, I don't know if that's the right term.
Yep.
My vocabulary.
It makes you sensitive to it, right?
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. William, what about you?
Well, I guess I'm the old one up here. I'm older than both of them considerably. So I grew up in Mayfield, and when I grew up, you kind of went to school by where you lived. And when I was 7, my dad got a job at USAC, and my mom was on at General Tire, so we moved to Windsor Drive, which is pretty much a predominantly white area. And like I said, you go to school by where you live, so I went to Longfellow Elementary School, growing up, and, you'd go over to your friends' houses and things like that, and then, the next day, you get to talking to your friends, and then they tell you, well, my mama said you can't, come over to the house anymore, and of course, as a 9, 10-year-old kid, you don't understand that, and you go home and you tell your mom, say, well, I can't go over to Scott's house no more, and his mama said I couldn't come, and, your parents, they don't want to just say, well, it's because you're black, they don't want to, insult you like that, but, it just as you get older, you think about things like that have happened in your life, and it makes you wonder, what were their parents thinking? Why were they trying to separate me from their kids, or as it is like now when you go out, you go to a store or something, and, as you're growing up, a young man, 14, 15 years old, you're walking, like through Walmart and places like that, and, every time you turn a corner, somebody's watching you, you feel like somebody's watching you, or as soon as you walk into the store, somebody gets right behind you and kind of follows you around the store as you're shopping, and you look down there and they looking at you, and then they just kind of step back, and you're like, what's the problem? Nothing, and then they go on about their business, but, you get that feeling in the back of your head that they're constantly watching you, and, things like that as you're getting older, as I've shared earlier, like my wife and I will go somewhere, and as Omar said, you always open the door and, you let your spouse in first, and people you're like, hey, how are you? And then, you walk in behind them, and it's like, oh, like it's kind of a double take. It's like, is he really with her, you know, or
You married to a white lady?
yes,
too?
I forgot. Yes, I do. I
Yeah.
am married to Peggy. I'm
Thank
sure
you,
she's-
Stacy.
Thank
Filling
you,
in the
Stacy.
gap.
Yes, yes.
He's
My
married to a
wife is
white girl,
white, so
too.
she's
Yeah.
here somewhere. For those of you that didn't know that, but
Yeah.
anyway. And like we'd go, you know, we, you know, or you go out to a restaurant to eat somewhere.
Yeah, tell that story, William, of what happened at the
You
restaurant.
know, like we always, before Patty's Barn, we loved Patty's. We would go there several times a year, and there's always a certain table that we would sit at, and there's a fireplace. And then back behind me, where I would always sit, there's a clock. You know, and as you're sitting there eating, you know, whether they're looking at me or looking at the clock is an irrelevant issue. You know, you would, as you know, you look around. You know, you look around at people, they'll be looking at you, and then when you look, they look away. Whether they were looking at me or at the clock, I have no idea. But because of experiences that I've had in my life, things that have happened, you think about, you know, you think, well, they're looking at me because I'm here with this white lady eating, and, you know, they're offended by that, you know, it's bothering them, you know, because when I look up and make eye contact, their first thing to do is look away. Instead of, you know, speaking hi or anything like that, they just look away. So that gives me the impression that, you know, hey, you know, you obviously do not like what you're seeing, so that's why you looked away.
Yeah, so I want to make a quick point about this because your past experiences play into this. Like these guys, it's not like they're paranoid. It's because of past experiences they've each had that lead them to believe when somebody gives them a look or they experience something in a restaurant or out, I mean, the odds are better than not that it has something to do with their race. I was telling William, I'm in a restaurant all the time, and if I'd been in his situation, I would have also wondered, are they looking at me or are they looking at the clock? But the difference would have been, this happens to me all the time, I'd have been like, they're over there staring at me because they probably go to our church and they're trying to figure out is that him? You know, is that him? I'll run into people all the time. I'm like, I don't know if they go or not. But that's been my experience, so I would never think race. Well, you think race, but the reason you think race is because of issues you've had in your past, you know, whether it's conversations you've had or experiences you've had growing up. Talk for just a minute, because you guys all touched on this, and I think this is at the heart of it. That maybe those of us who don't have these experiences, we don't connect these dots. Talk for a minute about what those things, as subtle as they may be at times, but what do those experiences communicate to you about your value, dignity, self-worth? What kind of message is that sending to you? Omar, you want to go first?
It's kind of hurtful. Anger, I mean, there's a whole broad band of emotions you go through. You know, when you go to somebody and say, hey, I'm Omar Hernandez, nice to meet you. And they say, you speak good English, you know. And
Yeah, thank you.
You
Yeah.
could have responded with your name and a handshake. But, you know, that's one of the
Yep.
it's one of the things you just go through. You know, it's hurtful. It'll make you mad.
I was going to say, in some of the conversations we've had, tell the story real quick about the job you were on. You know, you own the
Yeah,
company. Explain that
It was
to
a new
them.
construction job, and we were there working. And sometimes we don't meet the homeowners because they don't live from this
Mhm.
area. They're usually either building a vacation home or transferring or transplanting. So we were working on site, and I have 3 white guys that work for me.
You can call us white guys.
Yeah.
We're good with that. Yeah.
I got 3 guys that work for me that are not of color. And, you know, we're working, and the homeowner had come in, and he walked into the house, and he looked directly at me. We made eye contact, and he went to find the nearest white guy to introduce himself to and ask him about the progress of the job. And he kind of
Assuming that guy was the boss,
assuming
right?
that guy was the boss. I can only assume that he assumed that.
Yeah,
guy was the
he
boss.
was assuming that guy was the
But,
boss. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he points at me, and the man looks at me, and he just, I don't know if he was embarrassed or in shock or what it was, but, you know, because we made eye contact before he even spoke, and the first person he spoke to was the
Yeah.
American man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does sends a message. And we've talked about this a little bit, and William, I want you to weigh in on this next. It sends a message that they almost view you as less than or somewhat inferior. It feels like. Weigh in on that a little bit about
I mean, it does make you feel it's degrading a little bit. I mean, it makes you think, you're looking down at me when you're talking to me. You don't think that I'm as good as you are. You don't feel that I, could possibly be the boss, or I could possibly, be the fire marshal, the guy that's, could actually come in here and say, yeah, close your doors, you're done. You don't look at me that way. You can tell by when you're talking to the people that they feel you as inferior, and it could, and a lot of that also, well, not a lot, but some of that could be, some of the things that we have been through, as he said, some of the different issues that we have came across, and makes us a little bit more defensive, a little bit more on guard when we're talking to someone. And like I said, when we're out, when you speak, you actually speak, like myself, when my supervisor and I, or when myself and one of the other officers go out on a call, or to a location or something, even if I am the lead on the case, a lot of times they will initially speak to the person that's with me. If they're white, they'll initially speak to them first and think, naturally just assume that they are the person that's in charge.
Stacy, you want to weigh in on that at all, about the dignity and self-worth piece?
Yes, it does kind of make your self-worth feel like it's been dejected in a sense. Just the fact that, yes, I'm African American, but I'm also a human being. And I just kind of realized that, the babies I'm out with or my friends, they just make me feel more than I'm just a color. Like, I am a human being. They love me for who I am. They love being around me, and that's all that matters. So I just have to kind of take that into consideration, like, okay, whatever these people think, it doesn't even matter. They're not even going to see me again. And if they do, my color isn't going to change. It's going to stay the same. So, I mean, it's just, you got to.
I think what you guys are weighing in on, though, and I'm not the spokesman for all black or white people here, okay? So, but from my perspective, if I could talk about those of us who are white, I think sometimes we miss all of this that's going on. And so when something happens in our nation or in our community, and it's got racial tones to it, we look at it as an incident, as an isolated incident, and are like, okay, well, let's just see how this plays out, and let's see what happens here, da-da-da. It's an isolated incident. Whereas we don't have the history, and we don't have all of this over the years that's building up and that has led into it. And when you see the Hispanic community or the African American community responding in a way that's stronger, and you're like, why are they responding so strongly to that? Well, there's more to the story than what we're seeing or what we're experiencing. There's one of the truths that I've learned from these guys, and I don't even know if I've told you this, but one of the things that I've learned from them is that things are far more complex than they seem. Here's the way I would put it up here on the screen. The further away we are from a problem, the simpler it looks. That's why sometimes, and all of us do this in different areas, but that's why sometimes us white folks are just like, you know what, if you just do that, it'd solve everything. Or why don't they just do that? And we've got like a 30-second answer for deep-seated racial tensions. Well, it's because we're so far away from it that it just looks really simple to us. But the closer we get, the more complex it becomes. The closer we get, the more you see, oh, no, that's contributing, and there's a whole history there. And you begin to understand there's a lot going on, including this dignity, value, and self-worth piece. And if you could imagine going your entire life and having experience after experience that communicated to you that you weren't as valuable as somebody else, how would you eventually respond? I mean, you begin to approach situations a little differently and with a little bit more passion. And I think that's one of the things that you guys have helped me to understand is there are pieces of this that because of the way I grew up, like it's not my fault, I just didn't know. What's my fault is I didn't ask fast enough. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was going to say, I mean, there's a lot of people who lack cultural contact. They lack historical understanding. Some people, it's a learned behavior from their family. So some people don't even understand why they discriminate or, are racist. And then a lot of times people they're scared to experience something outside their little box. So they don't want to get to know that individual that's different from them. They don't want to know. They already have all these preconceived notions about who they are, or just because they are affiliated with a certain group. And, you know, just like I said, not all blacks commit crimes or lazy. Not all whites, you know, are racist. Not all Muslims are Middle Eastern. Not all Hispanics are illegal. You know, so it's like you have to get to know that person individually instead of making an assumption just because they're part of a group as a whole. I mean,
Yep.
it's the individualism that counts. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's easy for us to sit over here on the side and go, hey, when it comes to immigration, all illegal immigrants ought to be kicked out immediately. And I'm not saying if that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's easy for us to say that when we've never sat down with someone who had to make that choice and learn their story. It's easy to say, well, you know what, if blacks would just get off of welfare and they'd get jobs, then they'd be in a better place economically, and I don't know what they're protesting for, go get a job. Well, that's easy to say when you're sitting there and you've gotten what you've gotten and you're experiencing the life you're living, but you've never put yourself in their shoes or learned and understood the issues and what they're facing. You just can't paint these broad strokes. And if we would have more conversations like this, I think we would have less tension. We might not agree, but we would understand each other better. William, what will you weigh in on that?
One thing I'd like to say is, I mean, have a conversation with someone. I mean, my wife owns a nail salon, and she works on people all day, and I mean, which, as she said, my wife is white, and so, I mean, she gets, some of her clients constantly will ask her, well, what does your husband think? What does William think about this issue? Well, you know, yeah, you can ask my wife, because, of course, we're going to talk about it, but ask me. You know, have that conversation with me. Come to me and say, okay, William, listen, you know, it's all in the news about this happening and this happening and this happening. I mean, how do you feel? I mean, what's going on? You know, why are so many people upset about that? What is causing that? You know, what is causing people to be upset? You know, don't just assume, you know, that it's, you know, a reason for someone to be upset. It's just, that's just a reason for us to argue and fuss and protest. No, I mean, there is actually something, as he said, deep-rooted, something that we've went through, you know, that's causing us to feel this way. I mean, ask us, you know. Like I said, my wife gets asked this on a regular basis, you know, what does he think about it, you know? And it's not just like with racial issues. It's everything that's going on in the world, you know, the school shootings and things like that. I mean, you know, she'll, you know, because I do work with the police department, she's like, you know, gets asked constantly, but, you know, sit down with someone and just ask them what do they think about it, how do they feel, and be open to what they have to say. Don't just ask and then start texting and, you know, playing tiddlywinks or whatever, but when you talk to that person, engage, ask them, and then give your input and talk to that person and explain how you feel, and let that person explain how they feel and why they feel the way they do.
And even if so, like my black friends, they love talking to me, especially with all the racial tension. I was like, it's hard to prove somebody's motive and intent. Like, you can't prove that. I'm all about facts, especially being well-rounded. So you can't prove that somebody abused their power because they're racist. No, I mean, as law enforcement, yes, they have to take certain precautions. And there are individuals out there who are disobedient, they don't like to listen, they like to fight. So, I mean, you have to protect yourself and society, the people that's around you. So it's not always something that's like based off racism.
Yeah, every
So-
action isn't racially
Yeah,
motivated,
mhm.
but there are certain instances that are. One of the things that, as I've started having conversations with these guys over the last couple of years, one of the things I realized was when these instances happen, partly because I viewed it as an isolated incident, and partly because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what would make it more difficult or what would make the problem worse, that I would often just stay silent. But there was a quote I came across from Martin Luther King Jr. that got my attention. It says this: in the end, he said, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So, Omar, let me start with you, and if the rest of you want to weigh in. When something happens that gets the attention of our nation, whether it's a huge immigration debate or whether it's some racial thing that happens, what do you wish somebody like me would do and would say in those moments?
I wish you would approach me and try to understand the other side, because I mean, I see my side, you see your side. If we get together, we can see try to.
I wasn't
Figure it
born.
out.
I wasn't born in Mexico, and I didn't come over here when I was 5, so I can't understand that side of
No,
it, right?
No, I mean it's a, you come to a new country, new place, new language, new customs. I mean it's a complete different from what you're used to. Same thing with if anybody was to go, do mission work or do,
Yep.
On a vacation out of the country. You're immersed in a different culture that you have to try to figure out. But
Hmm.
we chose to be here, and we chose to live here. So now we have to figure out how to have these conversations.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good.
We should just have a sit-down conversation, just where we just sit down and talk about it, I mean, don't just assume or don't just take it, for what they're saying on the television, because TV, news, I mean, social media and all that, whoever is putting that out there, they're putting their view of it. They're not putting everybody's view. That's just like saying that all white people feel the exact same way. That's not the truth. Just like not all black people feel the same way. I mean, but it's the silent majority. I mean, because the people that are putting it out there are just a very few. They're putting out stuff out there on social media. They're putting stuff out there on the TV, the news, the radio. I mean, just because that's how that person feels does not mean that's how we feel. And that's why I always say, just come talk to me, ask me, just let's have a sit down and talk about it.
Is it safe to say that silence can be interpreted as we don't care?
Oh, yes.
So I think unintentionally that's the message that we sometimes send when we don't go have conversations and ask and listen, is we're communicating, even if that's not true, well, I don't care about your pain, or I don't care about your experience, or I don't care about your position on this. Were you going to weigh in, Stacy?
I was gonna say, not even just silence. You even have people that talks a lot, that put everything out on
No,
social media,
surely
but
not.
they don't want to
Surely
make a
not.
difference. Like, they don't do anything. They just like to talk.
Yeah.
So I mean, talking is okay, but what are you gonna do about it?
Yep. Okay. So I've got one more question for you, but I'm going to do what's going to feel like a 3-minute sermon before we get to the question. So just hang with me. So here's one of the things that I've realized over the last couple years. In the first century church wrestled with all the same tensions we wrestle with. And they were as heightened, if not more heightened, than what we have in our country right now. Let me give you a quick list of some of the people who were in the first century church. You had Jews and Gentiles. And there was, if you go back and read your history, there was significant racial tension between these two groups. I'll show you an example in a second. You had freedmen and slaves. So can you imagine this? You show up at church, and you have people who were born into slavery who have no freedom, and sitting right down the row from them, you have the people who are their masters. There's tension in terms of freedom, in terms of economic standing. You had women who in the first century were viewed as inferior. They wouldn't even allow them to testify in court. They didn't value what they said at all. So you had this tension between men and women. So you've got all this tension going on in the first century, and then they all begin following Jesus. They all show up in the same church together, and you can imagine what that was like. And they're having to wrestle through, how do we follow Jesus and love one another when we're in a culture where we shouldn't get along at all? I'll tell you how prevalent this was. Peter, if you know much about church, if you grew up in church, Peter, like big deal, Peter. The guy who stood up, after Jesus' resurrection, preached that first message, 3,000 people started following Jesus in Jerusalem. Peter's a big deal. Well, guess what? 15 years after the resurrection of Jesus, the church is still having a hard time. They can't come together. 15 years after it, Gentiles and Jews are still at odds, and they're worshiping in two separate places because they can't coexist. And Peter, in spite of everything Jesus had taught and modeled for him, would not walk into the home of a Gentile person. It took God speaking to Peter in a dream and saying, you have to go to that guy's house, for Peter to go. Luke records for us this exchange in his account that we call Acts. Here's what happened. While talking with him, talking about a Gentile named Cornelius, Peter went inside Cornelius' house, and he found a large gathering of people. Now, here's what you have to know. This was the first time in Peter's life, that he had ever stepped into the home of a Gentile person, because from his point of view, it was against the law, it was forbidden. He's probably walking in there holding his breath going, maybe I don't have to breathe this Gentile air. I can just get in and out. Like this was such a big deal to them. He said, Peter said to them, listen to this, can you imagine? You are well aware that it's against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. This would be like me walking into one of your houses and going, hey guys, I just want you to know that we white folk don't walk into Hispanics' homes or blacks' homes. I'm a pretty big dude for doing this. It's like Stacy would look at me, kick me in the tail, and say, you can get right back out my house, It would not go well. I mean, this is a kind of tension that existed. And then Peter goes on, it sounds like he makes it even worse. He says, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. Implication. Hey, because you're black or because you're Hispanic, I thought you were impure and unclean. I've been taught that my entire life. It's how I was raised. I just believe that. This is how deep-seated the tension was. But I want to highlight a couple different words in this statement because I think this is the key. Peter said, but God has shown me that I shouldn't call anyone, including any of you who are Gentiles, impure or unclean. This was Peter walking into a home where he knew no Jew might associate with him ever again because he did it. And looking at them and saying, I shouldn't be here. But while things have not changed in our country, things have changed in my heart. And while it's still acceptable to have this type of tension and prejudice in our country, I'm not going to demonstrate it anymore because God doesn't demonstrate it either. And this was the breakthrough moment for the Jewish people that led to a lot of this reconciliation taking place. Now, I tell you all that for this reason, and here's the question. I'm getting to the question now. I tell you all that for this reason. Because the only way we will overcome the tensions in our country and in our communities is if those of us who are followers of Jesus lead the way in doing it. And we have an example and a model in Jesus and in those first century Christians who finally, to their credit, figured it out. So my question for you guys is this. What do you wish those of us who are part of this church would do differently to try to lean in and address this? You're ready to go, Stacy. You go first.
I got to get this over with. Just become more culturally aware of your surroundings, of people that's different than you. Also, just become more involved and interact in communities that's different from your own. Just go to a black community and see what's going on around that community. Not all people there are criminals. They're not going to hurt you. Like, get to know somebody and see how they're living and there are hardworking individuals who still have to, who don't live in the best conditions. So just, kind of get to know that person and don't look at their skin color.
I've said it several times today. My thing is, have a conversation. Come talk. I'm sure anybody here would say the same thing, but come have a conversation with me. Come sit down and talk to me one-on-one. Ask me the questions that you want to know. Do black people do this? Is this the way it is? Just talk to me, but be open to my answers. Don't just, but be open to what I have to say. Come and have a sit down, talk to us, and then maybe talk to after you've had a conversation, talk to your family, let them know, get rid of some of the stereotypes, because that's one of the biggest problems that we have.
Omar?
Yeah.
Good answer, Omar.
That's what they say.
Lazy. I was going to say, also just be respectful of someone else's culture and customs. It's not going to affect the way you believe or behave or think. It's just being respectful of it and just knowing that there are people out there different from you, and that's just how it is.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
Yeah. And please don't think I meant for you to change your beliefs. I didn't. I didn't
don't
mean
do
that.
that,
No,
no.
no. I just meant just be open to what we have to say, to listen to what we have to say, and to understand, what we've been through and the things that we've been through in our lives will have us. That's the way we act, the way that we act, the way that we do, or the way that we portray ourselves.
Yeah, I think friendships go a long way in that.
Yeah.
But you have to be intentional about reaching out. And we've talked about this privately. Everybody tends to surround themselves with people who are just like them. And it takes someone who's intentional enough and has the courage to step across the divide and reach a hand to the other side and start developing some friendships. Your life will be better and more meaningful if you do that.
I was gonna say, funny story, that I was involved in a bunch of clubs in high school. I was involved in the Spanish club, FFA, and I mean, I'm not into
Stop right
farming.
there. Stop right there. FFA, and that stands for.
Future Farmers of America.
That's right. You are not a farmer,
I'm not a farmer.
but you got an
So, but I
FFA
love-
because.
yeah, because I wanted something, experience something different, and I love diversity, and I love to, that things are different in the world.
Okay, so let me wrap it up with this. What do we do with this? I want to give you 3 steps that I wish all of us would take. 1, choose to learn from somebody who's different than you. So be intentional about reaching out, having these conversations, developing these friendships. Number 2, would you pay attention to prejudice that may be in your heart and you don't even realize it's there? Like Peter, when God shows it to you, would you deal with it? And then number 3, let's make a difference. Not by posting on social media and hashtagging stuff. I mean, words are powerful. But listen, if all you're doing is posting on social media and hashtagging stuff, you really don't care that much. It's when you're willing to give your time and give your money to those issues and to organizations that are trying to help solve those problems. That's when you know you care. So yeah, use your words, but give your time and your money too. Our church needs to be this kind of place. I think we are. I want us to get better at it, to be the kind of place that addresses these issues in our community. Our country needs it. Our community needs it. But it'll only happen if those of us who follow Jesus lean into it and follow Jesus' example to listen, befriend, care for, and defend. Would you guys thank these 3 one more time for sharing with us? Absolutely incredible. Stacy will be back preaching next week. She's going to take over.
I'm done.
Let me pray for us. We're going to get you out of here. Thanks so much for your patience today. Father, thanks for setting an extraordinary example, Jesus, of loving people, all people. Didn't matter who they were, where they came from. Those of us who follow you, we don't do as good a job of that as we need to sometimes. Help us to follow your example. Help us to be intentional about reaching a hand out and developing relationships and friendships and learning, listening to people, seeing things from their point of view, and most of all, loving people for who they are, no matter who they are, no matter where they've come from, no matter their background. Help us to be a group of people who continue to bring healing and make our communities a better place for everyone, because everyone really does matter to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.